Welcome back to pixelprojectradio, the video game discussions and analysis podcast. A different kind of episode today. We're doing a first impressions on a recently released game, Clair Obscur Expedition 33. I'm joined by Dave Jackson from Tales from the Backlog podcast. What's up, Dave?
Rick, thank you for having me on. I have to wait a little bit before I get to talk about this game on my own show, but there's so many thoughts swirling around, so I'm really excited to get into it.
I am feeling the same way. First impressions episodes are not something that I tend to do often over here, but every so often a game comes around that really excites me in such a way that I think it would be a fun idea to do. Notably, we did that for Final Fantasy XVI, I remember. I don't remember if that was released in the main feed or just the Patreon feed, but I do remember that. And Clair Obscur came out. I knew that I wanted to play this day one. This was on my radar for a long time, as it has been for many. And playing it, I am so far blown away. I'm only about 10 hours in, or so. I'm really taking my time. Mm-hmm. But it is a breath of fresh air in a lot of ways. And I want to say this up top, too. It will be on the show proper. We've got 3 or 4 episodes of narrative analysis for Clair Obscur coming later in the year. But I wanted to talk about it now, early, while it's still fresh. Admittedly, this episode's coming out like roughly a week after release, so, I'm not one of those day one folks. There are already full playthroughs on YouTube of this game.
Yeah, people just get, it comes out, they no life it for like 3 days so they can be one of the first to get the playthrough up there. Respect to anyone who can like put that time in and put in that work to get a high quality playthrough up there so quickly.
Especially the no commentary playthroughs. Those are the real heroes.
Yeah.
And we salute you. But today we're just going to talk broadly about Clair Obscur, what we've liked so far, about what we've been playing. This will be spoiler-free, absolutely no spoilers. We'll preface with things that we think might verge towards that, but I don't think either of us will be spoiling anything. We just want to, talk briefly about a new game that's exciting us, and hopefully, if you're a new listener coming in because of the Clair Obscur hype, hopefully you check out the back catalog and you stick around. So, Dave, how long have you been playing Clair Obscur? What's your play clock looking like?
I don't know, 10, 12 hours, something like that. I just finished Act 1. The acts are very clearly divided. You'll know when you get there. So I finished Act 1. I got a kind of a ability for exploration, and then I just explored a ton. So yeah, 12-ish hours, something like that. So I'm not that far ahead of you. There is a lot to kind of explore around if you don't want to just mainline the story in here.
And you and I have talked off mic. You are feeling just as excited about this as me.
Oh yeah, dude. It's you said a breath of fresh air, and it's like I have a lot of thoughts about all the discourse about how this game is saving JRPGs or turn-based combat or any of that bullshit, but like it's legitimately different from even a lot of like the recent favorites in the genre that I've played. And I play a lot of these games. Like this is one of my favorite type of game. And the games that this game takes inspiration from are some of my favorite games of all time. So to see a kind of different take, and I think a lot of the difference in the fresh air quality comes from where this studio is from and what art inspirations they're taking and things like that. So I couldn't agree with you more that it just feels incredibly fresh while maybe not reinventing the wheel the way some people are claiming.
It feels fresh, but also, at least to me, feels very much steeped in the history of 90s, early 2000s JRPGs. Not totally. Yeah. This doesn't feel like, I've seen some folks saying, yeah, this feels like a 90s JRPG. I wouldn't go that far personally, but it feels more like that than not. There's a lot of common DNA there and a lot of things that they're doing that pay homage. Did you like how I Frenched up that word unintentionally?
Yeah.
Omne du homage. They're doing a lot of that, a lot of the tradition in the genre, and it's working for them. But they're adding a new perspective, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
I'm playing this on PC. Finally putting my beefy rig to a test. It looks beautiful. This is one of the rare instances where I've been taken aback by a game's visual fidelity. And I think it's because also the art direction is so nice.
Yeah, it's not just that it has these beautiful photorealistic 4K textures or something like that. It's the beautiful textures and character models and stuff like that, plus this very, very stylish art direction, like you said. Like, just think about the prologue and how, you have those really striking colors and all the flowers and everything like that around the city streets. And it's striking when you boot it up, just looking at how it looks. It's not all the flash of, the stuff in combat, which it is flashy, which turn-based combat is not always flashy. This one definitely is. There's an emphasis on that too. But just like, look at any screenshot of this game basically, and you'll be like, wow, this is, not only is it realistic looking, but it's got a real style to the art direction too.
And it's no surprise that color plays such a large role. Let's talk about the name for a second. Clair Obscur is a sort of anglicized spelling, I guess is one way to put it, of an Italian phrase called chiaroscura, which is made up of the Italian words chiaro, which is light or clear, and obscuro, which means obscured or dark.
Okay.
This is a technique that was found in painting as far back as like I don't want to drop stylistic periods and get it wrong, but paintings dating back to the 1500s, maybe even before. This technique was used back then, and what it is a contrasting of light and dark, of light and shadow. And JRPG writers around the world are palming their foreheads saying, why didn't I think of this?
Yeah. You can also tell in like the naming of game systems and stuff. You have Pictos and Lumina and Chroma, and you have all of these other words and phrases that are like directly related to light and color and things like that too. So, art is on the forefront of this as a game, just generally.
Yeah, and color symbolism plays a huge role, and I suspect it'll play a larger role once I'm farther in the story. That idea of chiaro and obscuro, light and dark, shadows, we can expand that out to be about contrasts, life and death, light and darkness, the shadow versus the self. Any number of thinkers across time have grappled with this concept. And on one hand, yes, this has been brought into stories before, but on the other, I think this is being done in a fresh way, and I'm really excited to see where this goes. From the opening scenes, you see, the color symbolism at play early on. This town, Lumiere, well, particularly certain members of the town, but again, that's not really a spoiler, but I don't want to dive too much into the story, are characterized, are represented by the colors of red and white. Both of those can mean a lot of things, but they are both in tandem and sometimes at opposites with each other. Power versus purity. Birth versus red, the color of blood. We could think birth and murder, birth and the loss of life, passion and, passivity. A lot of different directions you could go with this, but that opening area, Lumiere, that is characterized in such a colorful, vivid way is completely at odds with where the game goes shortly thereafter. A very much darker landscape, with the exception, again, of one area. I have a lot of theories about where this may be going, but we see this idea of contrasts, of light and dark, of opposites and how they relate to one another being put forth very early on. And I'm really, really excited and looking forward to seeing where this goes.
Yeah, same here. And you mentioned contrasts. I mean, I learned a little bit about French history by looking into the inspiration for the setting from a particular period in French history before World War I, when optimism was at an all-time high and arts were flourishing and things like that. And you have that contrast with what happens, like not even a spoiler, just like what the basic premise of this story does not fit with high optimism, and it fits into character motivation super early on, like within your first 10 minutes of talking to people in the game. So like the way that they set those things up, it makes for like a really interesting and rich world from like basically the second you start playing it. The first time you look at something, the first time you see what the story concept is, and the first time you hear two characters talking in a way that's not super like, let's teach Dave what this game is all about. It's like two characters really talking to each other about their shared history and how they live in this world and stuff. It all comes down to that contrast.
I like the setting a lot too, and I did appreciate that. They're not afraid to drop certain ideas or phrases onto you and sort of wait to expound upon them or define them. Well, not even define them. They don't really do that. You don't get a lot of as you know dialogue here. You don't get a glossary that explains exactly what the fracturing was, or the fracture, I think it's called. You're left to fend for yourself with context clues for a while, which is a mature way to handle this.
Yeah, no, they introduce that stuff, and then they just kind of trust that you're going to be interested enough to play long enough to find out what the gamage is and what the fracture was and these things. Like, that's perfectly fine. I'm hooked. I'm happy with waiting to find out exactly what happened, you know?
Do you happen to know what time period this is modeled after?
In French history?
Just offhand.
The Belle Epoque setting, which I have the Wikipedia page open. I'm not a French historian by any means, but that's the name of the setting, and it's like this pre-World War I area when, like I said, arts were thriving and optimism was high and things like that.
Gotcha. I appreciate that very much too. I mean, not just that this is from a French perspective, and it is very French inspired, but being steeped in the real world, this isn't, and you know, you all know me. I don't have anything against fantasy stories, sci-fi, fantasy. I love that stuff. But it's really nice to have a story where the setting is based in, you know, reality once in a while. This could be, I don't know if you could consider this low fantasy. I don't want to open that debate once again. But, well, I don't know. But there are real world inventions here. There are guitars, right? There are Ferris wheels. There are what look like apartment complexes. This isn't...
Dude, there are mimes in this game. That's as real world as you get.
Yeah, there are mimes. Fuck me, there are mimes. It's exciting. The French angle, I'm admittedly not super familiar with French culture, but the French angle is an interesting one. I can't really lock into the influences just on sight that they're pulling from that, except for the music. But it is nice. You know, we see a lot of this genre coming out of Japan, and that's not knocking them. I mean, the writers over there do this genre very, very well, and the creators in general, I should say. But seeing a new perspective and a new team is really exciting. This is a brand new team. I don't think this studio has done anything before this, have they?
It's their first game. Obviously not the first game that the people have made, but as Sandfall, it's their first game.
Extremely exciting and an incredibly promising start. I mean, this is such a justification to what so many of us are saying about companies these days and how greedy they have become with their IPs and with their workers, and, you know, what they're asking and what they're charging and what they're not paying. Related to that. Mm-hmm. And, you know, there's a cynical part of me that's worried about that too, which is another conversation for another time. But seeing a smaller team make something so grand and so of the heart is exciting in a way that, you know, we don't see a lot of the time.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about the indie-ness of this game, but it is definitely a smaller core team, and they set out to make a game with these graphics using the Unreal Engine and stuff like that. There's things about this that kind of make me wonder, like, should we be grouping this in with all the other indie games? I mean, like, Charlie Cox is the star of the game. Like, can't be cheap to get Charlie Cox on your project. Andy Serkis and Ben Starr and Jennifer English from Baldur's Gate 3, like, there's a lot of star power in the voice cast. There's the credits are actually huge. There's a ton of people that worked on the game. So I want to, like, you know, set people out there. There's this narrative that was like, it's only 30 people that made the game, and it was not only 30 people that made the game.
No, it's a small core group of 30 people, but that doesn't mean that it's limited to those 30 people and that's it.
Yeah, exactly. But I think, like, if I can kind of guess at what you were like getting at there, was like we want smaller teams. We want companies to be able to make like games like this, single player games using supposedly outdated combat systems, to make the kind of game and like tell the kind of stories that they want to tell. And while I don't think this really fits in with that, like I want like smaller games made by less people who are paid more to work less, I don't think it really fits in with that. But I think that it does fulfill like the type of game that a lot of people are looking at, the bigger companies who have the means to make more games like this, and just being like, look how well this game did. Look how much it's sold. Look at how highly it reviewed. Look how many people love this game. This is what we've been asking for, instead of trying to make another fucking extraction shooter to try to make as much money as possible. Look what game's dominating the talk about video games over the last week. It's this one. So I definitely get like the idea there that like people can point to this and be like, this is an example of how this can work if you make a really good game.
And I'd be particularly interested in seeing just how much, how to phrase this, just how much influence and pull the publisher had on what game decisions were made. You know, that's something that we hear about a lot with these huge companies, you know, EA and honestly probably Square and Nintendo, that are making games, and that they have these guidelines and expectations for the products that are under their name, regardless of who's working on them. And those creative decisions have to fall in line with that. That's just how modern business in this frame works. And being that this is a smaller core team, yes, I know it's not just the 33 people or the 30 people that is being kind of poetically tossed about online, but I would be curious to know how much sway the developer or the publisher, the one that's funding this, had on this. I don't know. I didn't look into this at all. It doesn't seem like a lot. It seems like this is a passion project in the best sense of the phrase.
Yeah, the publisher is Kepler, which is... I mean, they've put out they have published some pretty notable releases over the last few years, but they're not a giant in the publishing sphere. I mean, like before this, probably their most notable game was Sifu, that they worked with, which is like a successful game, I think, but it's not Clair Obscur level of huge, you know? So yeah. I would guess, like you said, I mean, you play this game and you're like, I don't feel like they sanded off any weird creative edges in this game. I don't know if you got that feeling.
No, not at all. Not at all. And I don't expect to, just based on how things have been going. But it'll be interesting to go through this and do a full analysis on it. You had mentioned the combat. I want to talk a little bit about why the mechanics of this have been so exciting to me. And the two things that stick out right away are the battle system and the Pictos system, Pictos and Lumina system. Let's talk battle system for a second. This reminds me a lot of, you know, everybody is saying Super Mario RPG. That's the one that I've seen get tossed around the most because that's a popular JRPG, and it's a fine JRPG. It's good. I was thinking Legend of Dragoon. That's what this reminded me of immediately. I'm a huge fan of that game. I just finished up playing a large portion of it this year. That game has an addition system with the combat, wherein, you know, this a square overlay will be on the screen, and when another square falls into it, you have to press X, and that's how you do your combos. This is similar to that. It's still timed presses. There are multiple. Sometimes there are single, sometimes multiple, sometimes none at all. And that's how you get your combos and your moves to be more powerful. I'm a big fan of that. I see this kind of bashed online a lot as, you know, being kind of like jingle keys, you know, for somebody to get into the combat, like jingling keys. I think that's a pretty cynical way to look at it. I don't agree with that. I find it to be exciting, particularly because, too, you don't have to engage with it. I mean, you're you're nerfed pretty significantly if you don't, but you don't have to.
I disagree. I think you do have to, but more on the defensive end of things than the offensive end. I agree with you, though. I haven't played Legend of Dragoon, but I mean, there's a bit of Lost Odyssey's combat system.
Sure.
And when you get to your full analysis, Lost Odyssey may come up again, but there's a bit of that, it's much better than the ring system in Lost Odyssey for sure. And then you do have some of the defensive options that feel more out of the Mario and Luigi RPGs, where you have multiple ways that you need to defend against attacks, whether it's jumping over stuff, parrying, dodging out of the way. There's like 4 defensive verbs for these, depending on what attack is coming out. So that's what I got. I got a bit of Octopath Traveler's combat system out of the AP system, the conservation of AP between turns if you don't use them all, stuff like that. I love it. I love the combination of influences that go into the combat system. It feels like they were very strategic about like which things they used from other games. And I love how the characters all play very, very differently. It feels like each character comes from a different game almost, within the confines of Clair Obscur's combat system as a whole, if that makes sense.
It does. There's one character in particular that you get, I want to say it's the 4th character, that reminds me a lot of a sort of deck builder style game. Which that sounds like a really vapid comparison. It's not because of the weapons that they're using. It's because of how many if-then statements there are. If this is used, then this charges up. If this many charges, then this. If this move used and this many charges. That many if-then statements makes me think of a crunchy card game, and I really, really appreciate that. And in tandem, I mean, going back to the theme again of contrasts, in tandem with a high-octane action-oriented combat system, at least as action-oriented as turn-based can get, with parries, dodges, and jumps, that makes for a really exciting battle experience. I do like having those defensive verbs at play too, because they each have their own timing quirks and timing difficulties. It's significantly easier to dodge than it is to parry.
Yeah.
I don't know when I get the dip or the duck or the dive verbs, but I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's a long game. They're coming. Patches O'Houlihan, big inspiration for the game as well. One thing I'm wondering about, since this is just impressions, it's not a fully formed critique or opinion yet, but one thing I'm wondering about is how the game is going to balance player skill versus RPG stats, gear, pictos, everything that raises the math of how effective your characters are, because the best players in the game could just go beat the super bosses right out of the gate. If you can parry everything, you're allowed to parry everything. As far as I know, there is no unavoidable damage in the entire game that I've come across. There's one attack that will like remove a character from the battlefield, but it doesn't hurt them. So if everyone else is okay, they survive and they come back. So the best players will just time up all the parries. They'll do great against everything. The players who struggle with the timed stuff can lower the difficulty. So they did include that. And then it leaves the people in the middle, like me, who are fine at parrying. I'm not great at it. But I also don't want to lower the difficulty because I feel like I'm getting by. I'm doing okay. And I'll go fight those super bosses when I'm level appropriate. But there's a problem I had with Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga, where the end boss of that game is so incredibly difficult because they want you to be at a certain level and you have to be an absolute master of the defensive vocabulary, which in that game, I don't think that worked well when they raised the challenge up to that level. And so it's got me wondering, in the future, are they going to stay on an even difficulty curve? Or is it going to be like, okay, we're getting to the hard stuff now. You have to parry every single thing perfectly or you stand no chance. Because that's how the final boss of Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga felt, which was a nasty surprise.
Yeah, you have to somehow scale the difficulty such that it is challenging to the mechanical players that are parrying everything and the stats players that are playing the numbers game to win the battles. And
Right. And
that's
honestly,
a fine line to walk.
yeah, honestly, I think that what I've noticed from Expedition 33 so far is I think that they're okay with just saying our top 10% of players, they're just going to breeze through this and we're okay with that. Because I've been talking with some people who think the game is way too easy because they're really good at the parrying. So that makes me think like and this feels like a good thing on Clair Obscur's part to just say, if you're that good, you're just going to breeze through this because you're that good. And we're not going to make it harder for the other 90% of people just because of that.
And they've got a story to tell as well. This isn't so mechanically focused that the story falls to the wayside. I think the narrative is still the forefront. So it would make sense for them to think that way. Like, if you're that cracked at parrying, then, enjoy the story. I don't mean to brag, but I'm schmoovin' with the parries. I'm doing pretty well. The thing is, though, is that I have fought some things that I think I maybe shouldn't have so far. And while I won, not to brag, but while I won and while I could parry them and it's, dodge, it's fine. It wasn't exactly exciting because it turned into the chip damage game, right? And the stakes are there. Like they could wipe me out in 2-3 turns, but it takes me a long time. I have to really chip down that health bar. And is that exciting? I mean, I kind of look at that the same way as folks look at grinding. It's not mindless, don't get me wrong, and it is meditative, as I've called grinding before. It's just a different kind of tedium. You have to choose which one you're okay with. I don't know.
It would be like if Final Fantasy VII, the original, was just like, you can fight Ruby Weapon right at the beginning if you're good enough, instead of being like, you have to grind up to be able to fight this thing. I think it's the same thing. Like, if you have the patience to go do a half hour of nonstop parrying to beat this super boss before you're level appropriate, then by all means, try it. Give it a shot. I think that's what they're saying here. But for everybody else, they're like, yeah, just come back later. Like, it's an open, the overworld map is open. You can backtrack to places really easily. So just come back in, 10, 20 hours and try it again.
This is the minorest of spoilers. It's almost not, but it's the most minor. So, skip forward a minute if you don't want to hear it. There was one fight that I think I stumbled on a little earlier than I was intended to. I got there, so it's not like I cheesed the environment, but there was a part of that fight where the enemy faked out their punches and kind of pretended to hit and then stopped and then hit, which I laughed out loud. I loved that so much because it threw a wrench into my plan. And that's the kind of difficulty thing that you would have to adjust for those mechanically oriented players, right? Like being that this is an art themed game, there's a lot of art influence. I would love to see like a status effect that's like waterlogged or something that slows down your movements. So you have to adjust how you time your parries or your dodges or your jumps per character. I think that would be really exciting. It would be a pain, but I think it would be very exciting.
It would definitely shake things up, especially for, if you ever get to a point where you're like, this thing can't touch me, but, I got hit with this status. Now I have to adjust. It would shake things up. I would also probably complain in the moment about that for sure, though.
Oh, sure.
Wanted to ask you a question about how you feel about this, because the last time I was on the show, we talked about Souls games. I think that was the last time I was here. And the game Clair Obscur takes a lot of From Software influence, and not just because, it can be difficult, yada, yada, yada. I think there's a lot of like mechanical systems that they took straight out of Souls games. And, I've heard anecdotally that the game's director has a history with Sekiro. So like maybe a little bit of influence there too. Are you picking up on that stuff? Do you think that Souls experience has helped in any way?
If it has, I wouldn't be the guy to ask, I can see it. I haven't got far enough in Sekiro to really make an informed analysis on that. And Demon Souls too. I don't know that I'm the guy to ask. I can see it though in some of the monster design too, and obviously of course the parrying. I'm a big fan of the parrying and the dodge system. I think it's really great. I like how the windups and the time execution and the frame data of enemy attacks is generally not what you'd expect. It's always a little bit awkward, and that kind of prevents complacency. I'm a big fan of that. You know, I don't know that I would be the guy to ask about any other influences, but
that's
you know,
fair.
if you think they're there, I tend to trust your word on Souls more.
Yeah. So I think, and we talked about this in that Souls episode, but like there's so much more that goes into those games, even mechanically, than this boss hits really hard if you get hit by it, you know? And so I like this game using the Estus system and the quote, the bonfire system, where you can rest and replenish all your potions. They're limited potions. So like this is a thing in a lot of turn-based RPGs where it's like, I'm going to make sure I'm ready for the final boss by taking 99, you know, X potions or whatever. You can't do that in this game because they're limited. You start with like 3 or something. And you rest at those flags and they respawn all the enemies, but they replenish all your healing. So it sets up that little like, should I push forward and try and find another flag, or should I go back and heal up and try again now that I know the enemies better and I can probably get through this easier this time around? They brought stat scaling into this, which is something I absolutely never see outside of the Souls series. Like when you level up, your weapons will have specific stats that will give you bonus if you level up what kind of synergizes with your weapon. And that's a Souls mechanic that I even like the Neos of the world and stuff, I don't think those even have those, like even the hardest of them. So they definitely feel like they've taken a bunch and kind of looked at what else can we take besides enemies are going to hit hard if you don't watch their animations and stuff like that.
Yeah, the stat scaling is interesting too. Going back to that theme of contrast, you've got a decidedly non-JRPG approach to building characters. With, you know, you level up, you get a certain number of points and you allocate those to whatever stats you'd like. You also have a point system that I think is kind of right out of Final Fantasy IX with the Luminas and the Pictos. Yeah. So you don't have gear in this game like, you know, Final Fantasy VII, like you had said, but you do get these Pictos, which are equipable items, and once you battle enough with them, you learn their ability. That's the same as Final Fantasy IX, and then all of your available AP points, here called Lumina, can be used to equip abilities that you've already learned. Now here they do you a solid, and if one character learns it, everybody can equip it, which is really awesome. It's really allowing you to min-max your builds and play and express yourself through play however you'd feel. And I think that's very interesting to combine those two in that way. It's made this a real blast. You know, Mael in my game is just beating ass and tearing down everything almost single-handedly, whereas my Gustav is a powerhouse in terms of defense, but he's kind of getting outclassed in every other metric.
Yeah, it's cool too because I've run into some situations where I needed to completely remake my build right there for one specific fight. And the way that the Picto and Lumina system works, you can do that. And then you can just change your build back to something that fits a more general approach of just going through a level. For example, there are fights where you fight alone. Only one character can take part in this fight. And you can build up, you can spec for a solo fight as opposed to a full party fight. So stuff like that's great. The only issue I had is it took me legitimately 5 to 10 hours to understand the menu for the Pictos and Luminas. I think they could have done better with that. But otherwise, now that I get it, it's a cool character customization system.
It's an overflux of information for sure, but I think that appeals to those stats-based players that like to play RPGs by the numbers. You've got this huge crunchy menu that you can just pour over. You know, I'm only 9-10 hours into the game, and I've got upwards of 30 skills. You know, and that is a lot. That's not even counting the fact that you could still equip things that you've already learned if you don't want to spend the AP on that. It's a very crunchy mechanical game in that way, just like JRPGs of the 90s and the early 2000s. It's really something. I cannot wait to see how this expression of play evolves. I did get spoiled on the class of a character that's coming up. which I'm very excited to see how they do. I genuinely don't know how they're going to do it, but I can't wait to see it.
I was going to say something earlier, but I held back. But it's interesting, and I don't know if there are more characters incoming, but it's they certainly have lots of ideas for how to make different characters feel extremely different from each other.
We would be remiss, this episode's not going to be overly long, but we'd be remiss not to talk, I think, about the music.
Dude,
too.
yeah.
What are you feeling about the soundtrack?
I could not be more positive about this soundtrack. I'm blown away by it. And I don't have a lot of like really specific things to say or like, I love this particular influence in here, but just like a few small things. Like there's a bunch of songs that like don't sound really noteworthy on their own, but they have these really cool accents in them throughout. There's a mansion in the game that you go to, and the backing track is really just kind of chill, and then you have these like electric guitar accents that pop in, and it's really cool. And then there's another song that has a talk box in it, dude. I've been going nuts about this talk box because when was the last time you heard a talk box in a video game soundtrack? And it sounds really cool. So like stuff like that, the music will pop, but not in ways that I often am used to in video game soundtracks. Like there are like the melodies, and the main menu theme is great, and the battle songs are awesome, but I can say that about a lot of RPGs, but there's a lot of these tracks that have these things that just make me think like, man, the composer is like really cooking in here, like trying weird stuff out. Did you hear the story about the composer and how they got involved with this game, by the way?
Lorien Testard, they found him on SoundCloud, right?
Yeah, just a random, like, I think they said, the composer said they posted a track or a collection of tracks in a Discord server for indie game developers, and the people making this game found it. They were like, yeah, this is our guy. So it's crazy the way that you would hear that and be like, wow, they had a vision for what this soundtrack should be. And then, because it fits perfectly, in my opinion. I don't know. I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it's great. There's a lot of variety. There's a lot of contrasts. Going back to that core theme, what I think will be the core theme of this game is contrasts. There's a lot of that in here. The contrasts between the areas, the talk boxes versus the more intimate chamber settings versus the more lo-fi beats to chill and parry to. How I've seen it referred to. What I really like, there are some areas that really do feel like they've got a French influence to them. There's this gracefulness that is in a lot of French chamber music and French works, in elegance, in like a fragile elegance that is always there. Even when the music gets a little heavy, it's always effervescent, sort of bubbly and fizzy, elegant. It's refined. Even if it's kind of folk-inspired. Again, contrasts. The theme of Lumiere which is the opening area, by the way, is really nice. You get this really singable folk melody. Dun, dun, da, 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 dun, dun, da, 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 da. Very singable, very narrow range that just the common person can sing. And even in that kind of ploddingness of a singable folk melody that farmers sing, there's an elegance to it. A gracelessness. There's gracefulness in gracelessness, I guess you could say. One thing, this is me going kind of Pepe Sylvia a little bit. You can find this soundtrack on Spotify, on Bandcamp. You can listen to the whole thing. This is me going a little Pepe Sylvia for a second. And this isn't a spoiler because I'm just guessing, and I think I'm looking too far into this, but that theme of Lumiere, you can boil that down to 3 notes. Dun da 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 da. That da da da, just 3 notes. That's the skeletal structure. That's how I used to describe it to students. If you go to a much later track on the soundtrack that is titled after who I expect is the antagonist, although I think that might not be so simple.
Yeah, who knows?
All I'm saying. But it's named after that thing, that person.
Oh, yeah.
That skeletal structure is both alluded to and put forth in inversion. So instead of da-da-da, you get da-da-da. And I think I'm looking way too far into it because that's just a 3-note motif that's incredibly common. There's nothing weird about it, and I don't have the music in front of me. But if I'm right, I think that idea of contrasts, let's say yin and yang, for example, I think is going to play an immense part in the true nature of who we believe to be the antagonist. That's all I'm going to say. Near Automata, Near Replicant, everybody. The clear inspiration from those two games, I think. I'm really excited about it. This soundtrack is terrific. And it really, I hope it makes everybody think for a second about how many astoundingly talented people are out there and we just don't know it.
Yeah, 100%.
Like what did Brendan Fraser's character in The Whale say? Like, people are amazing. These people are everywhere. And this person just happened to be found in a Discord.
Yep. It's crazy to think of what it would have looked like for both sides had that game director not just been looking in a Discord server on the day before that message got buried by a bunch of other messages. I'm sure a lot of people sharing their work in wherever that place is. So it is kind of crazy to think of.
Balatro too, right?
Yeah.
Like just a normal person that's making a creative endeavor and just happens to get noticed. That is a life-changing event.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it turns. I'm not going to say that if they picked a different composer, the soundtrack would have been less effective, but it then sets like the tone of what this game is, because I think this is one of those soundtracks that is going to win a bunch of awards at the end of the year. I think it's going to be a soundtrack that people are going to like very, very strongly associate with this game and the story, most importantly. So if they do, return to some of those themes as you thought, perhaps they will, some of those motifs. I think it's going to be the type of thing where you're going to hear those notes, or you're going to hear maybe an inversion of that phrase, and it's going to have an impact on you because it's obviously just a super well done composition across the board. Like every new area that I go into, even if it's like wildly different music, I'm like, wow, this is just so good.
My prediction for Clair Obscur is that it is going to be in my personal running for Game of the Year.
Yeah.
And I think this is going to be a JRPG that's talked about long after this year is over. If they continue based on the trust they've built in me already, I really firmly believe that.
Yeah. I have heard, I read reviews when it came out, and a lot of reviews mentioned that they didn't love the direction that the story took, which they obviously didn't say what happened, so I don't know what they're talking about. But I agree with you. Probably regardless of where the story ends up going, unless it's like really fucking dumb, it's going to be very high on my personal Game of the Year. And if they stick the landing, like you said, this feels like an all-timer to me. The first 10, 12 hours that I played have certainly been all-time stuff.
I have trouble trusting these early reviewers, not like early reviewers from like outlets, just early reviews in general. Ever since I saw several early reviews saying that, oh yeah, 1000 times resist is just near, but it's not done as well. It's like, all right, I can't trust anybody anymore.
I'm glad I missed those reviews then.
Yeah. Geez, talk about reductive. I really believe in what I've played with this so far. Yeah. I'm just, I want to play it. So let's end the episode. I want to go play it.
I was going to say, like you and I, we both have several games going at a time for our shows. And for me personally, I always have one, maybe two, but usually it's just one that like when it's like, all right, I'm done with work, I'm sitting down at my PC, what am I going to play? And there's usually one that's like, that's the one you want to play right now. And that's absolutely this game. So probably after we hang up, I will be on it very soon after we're done here today.
Same, brother, same. Well, we're going to keep this short. That's all for today. Look forward to more Clair Obscur in your feeds, at least in this feed. I can't reveal the intentions and plans of others, but in Pixel Project Radio land later in the year, maybe August, November, sometime around there, you'll see 3 or 4 episodes on this. Until then, I think easy to say that we both recommend this wholeheartedly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go check this out. Take a break from Lunar, which I know you're all playing, and check out a new JRPG in Clair Obscur, Expedition 33. Thanks, Dave, for joining me. Tales from the Backlog podcast, folks. Check it out. Check it out.
Thank you.
And until next time, I'm Rick. I'm your host, and we'll talk to you again soon. Take care.